Hello, Dr. Wimberly. Yeah. Hello.
Oh, how are you?
I'm doing well. How you doing today?
I'm doing fine.
I'm Dr. Anthony Everett. We've got our cohort is here. I'm going to go ahead and set up another screen so you can see everybody. So if you could bear with me 1 second.
Thank you.
Uh-huh. In fact, I'll turn this around for now, and I'll get the other one.
Hey, Dr. Wimberly.
How are you?
Good to see you.
Nice to see you.
If you all can go ahead and introduce yourself right now, we get started.
Hi, Dr. Wimberly. My name is Reverend Katina Jackson. I'm from Somerset, New Jersey. I am a mother of 3 daughters and a wife of 1 husband. I have, I mean, you have to, it's so many different versions. So I respect all relationships. So of whatever nature they are, we're not here to judge people. So I love everybody with the unconditional love of Christ, and I'm excited about being part of this cohort. My project is to work with graduating high school seniors, young people from the ages of 17 to 23, who have chosen not to take college or the military as a career path, but to leave high school and go right into life. And so I'd like to establish a program where by the end of their interaction with me, they've not only received some spiritual mentorship, but also a life plan so that they feel that they have a plan and a purpose, and they're able to be responsible civically, socially, and spiritually in the community.
Are you getting any feedback, Dr. Wimberly?
No.
Okay, good. Good. All right.
And tell me your name again.
My name is Reverend Katina Jackson, C-A-T-I.
Thank you.
Hi, Dr. Wimberly. I'm Reverend Kimberly Clemens Jones, live in Valley Street, New York. Founder of the Content Project.
For some reason, I'm not hearing.
Oh. Let me do this. Let me just adjust something else here. I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Okay. Okay.
Is your laptop?
Okay, yo. I could probably speak up.
Can you hear me okay?
Still, could you speak just a little bit?
Okay. Is this better?
Yes, thank you.
Okay. I'm Reverend Kimberly Clemens. I'm from Valley Stream, New York. I pastor church. And I'm also a youth mentoring program for boys and girls of color. My program, what I'm focusing on is, okay, hi. The relationship. So my project is social and through the lens of storytelling, telling stories of prophetic and biblical. Nice to meet you.
All right, thank you.
Okay. You can stand there. Yeah, there you
Good morning, Dr. Wimberly. My name is Courtney. I'm a son of Cedar Top, that church. I have not established within my father's house. I have a mentor group called the 859 group. My project deals with Black youth and identifying and recognizing who they are and whose they are, understanding, learning who you are, their cognitive behavior, their training, stemming from where I came from in life into where I am now. The mentoring program taking on more than just dealing with them, dealing with the youth, but also building relationships with the family and connecting them with those outside of their family and in the community that they might not realize that care about them and on their team and want to see them succeed. So it's more of a mentor program to the 100th power. Dealing not with just the kids, but with the youth and then actually going into the house. That's my project.
Thank you.
Hey, Dr. Wimberly, good to see you. I'm probably gonna miss this afternoon's meeting today, but just so you know, 'cause we don't get done till 5 o'clock. But as you know, I'm Ryan Lynch, and so part of being in the first semester of this DMED program, I have to write a spiritual autobiography and a contextual analysis, and together, put those together and outcome the synergy paper, which my project or the theme of my project should come out of that. So I'm not sure what I'm gonna be writing about. I'm not sure what my final project is gonna be. However, I'm hoping that I'll be able to write about this notion of racial atonement through the lens of conciliation, not racial reconciliation. You already know how I feel about that.
Mhm.
And make it intergenerational. You know what I mean? Because I got to figure out a way to make this project of mine about racial at-one-ment through the lens of conciliation intergenerational. So that's basically the idea I'm trying to go for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
And Dr. Wimberly, I am the mentor for the program. The program comes out of United Theological Seminary. I'm Dr. Anthony Everett, as I said a moment ago. My research was a participatory research project that focused on what is in term prophetic activism. The title of it, my thesis was Prophetic Activism, Increasing the Academic Achievement for Low-Performing African-American Males at Mary B. Martin School. And so that's pretty much who I am. We're going to try to get these the cameras around better. So I think this one keeps going in and out. So I might just turn this other one around and switch it around and make it better. So, but we can hear you fine. Hopefully you can hear us as well now.
Certainly. Thank you.
You can give me that one number. And then I'll turn this other one that you. Okay. Is that good for you? Dr. Wimberly?
Yes.
Okay, all right.
Let's see. And I will tell you a little bit about myself. I am Dr. Natalie Wimberly. I am an ordained minister, as well as I honestly, the way I describe it is I've had a lot of fun following God around. And following God takes you into a whole lot of different spaces and places. So I started out as an educator. I taught school for 13 years. I was a school administrator for 7. I'm also, from that, I had everything planned to retire at 42 years old, and I was just going to do whatever I wanted to with that, the money coming from education and just kind of enjoying myself. And 7 years before that happened, God told me to go to Boston University. I'm from Alabama. So I traveled from Alabama to Boston to go to school full time, to seminary. And so I ended up in Massachusetts at Boston University in seminary. From there, that wasn't all God had planned. I finished seminary. I got my STM as well as my MDiv. And then God pointed me to the Massachusetts School of Professional Psychology, where I received my doctorate in clinical psychology. And specialized in health psychology as well as neuropsychology. And so it's been fun following God. It's been fun keeping myself open to what God has in store. And also just always, when you're dealing with the divine, you never know where you're going to end up. And at any point in time, you're never finished with anything. So this is a real journey. And so thank you so much for inviting me here today. I'm also the co-chair, one of the co-chairs of the Anti-Racism Task Force. And I wanted to pull up our presentation I had, if I can do that. Share. Okay.
Yeah.
Did it come? Yeah, there we go. And as I go with this, what I'd like to do though, could you tell me a little bit about, because I have this presentation things I want to share with you, and I can still go through some of it, but I'd like to be very specific about what you are looking for, what you're interested in knowing about what we're doing as an anti-racism task force. In all honesty, we're at the end of our work as a task force. We were actually called through a call to prayer to become a task force, and there we had a couple of tasks we were asked to do. One was to develop resources for the American Baptist Churches USA. And there were 3 subgroups that also focus the individual, the church, as well as the institutional. So resources in those areas. We were also asked to host a symposium. Our symposium is scheduled for October 30th. So in a couple of weeks. And also to host small and large groups. And some of those are training, some of those are just conversations. We also, our biennial meeting, which we have every 2 years, we actually provided a 3-day, 3 days of large and small group during that biennial. And we had presentations as well. And what we're really trying to do is to ground our denomination a bit in what we're doing, and trying to really understand where we are, why we are where we are. The American Baptist Churches is in some ways reaching a point where we want to do, where there's a vision for addressing anti-racism. Some of it, in all honesty, is out of a reaction to what's going on socially, which the church should respond socially. But also to figure out how we do this kind of work. And so that's where we are in terms of the task force. What we discovered in the work with the task force is that there's a lot of work to do. It's not something you can do in a week, in a month, or even in a 1 or 2 years, of course. Anti-racism or racism itself did not develop over in such a short period of time. It has been centuries, thousands of years. And in all of this, we have to take the time to figure out how to dismantle these systems that have been set up. And so that's the work of the task force. We sent a proposal to the Office of General Secretary to continue this work as a commission, which means the work can continue long term. And it can be something that the denomination can actually focus on in some ways as a part of the total ministry of our denomination. And so that's where we are while we're here. But are there specific things I would like to continue, but I also want to make sure that our time together is spent with you get what it is you were seeking. Would you like me to continue, or do you have a question?
This is,
I can't hear it.
can you hear?
Oh, continue? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. All right. With this first part, I like to show this because it helps kind of orient us to kind of where we are. So I'd like to share this video with you.
That's what's happening. When you hear the term, the kingdom of God is at hand, because of this time orientation, Western man will ask when.
No, it's not.
Because of the spatial orientation, the native man will ask. You're talking about like behind it. Is that
Dr. Wimberly,
Yes.
are you sharing your sound? We can't really do this.
Pardon me?
Are you sharing your sound as well? Can't hear it.
Yes, you can't hear. Oh my. Okay,
Yeah, we can't hear it.
let's see.
They got that.
when is the kingdom of God going to be here?
Can you hear it now?
That's what the Western is.
No, it's very.
For the native man to become a Christian,
Okay,
We can read close.
that's okay. What he's saying is that there's a different orientation, and the Western man thinks of time, the time orientation in terms of when, and the native man, the native culture thinks of it in terms of where. And the reason I like to bring this up and for us to hear and kind of see what he's talking about, the best example for me is well, of course, I've done clinical work, and when I work with my patients, that work for me is still sacred work. It's ministry. And I remember talking to a Bible study group, and it came up, and I said, you know, I was thinking about the patients and the work I'd done with them, and I was telling them how my dependence, even though I do have a doctorate degree in clinical psychology, my dependence, my orientation for my work was not the information that I gained, simply the information I gained in school. It was always God. It's still very God-centered. And so it being God-centered, that meant I prayed before I saw patients. I prayed for my patients. And there are some, because I worked at Boston University at the Danielson Institute, if a patient wanted to pray with me, I could pray with my patients at their initiation. And it was interesting in that Bible study, I said, you know, I was, thinking about how God does things and how God brings us success. I said, I was very successful with my patients. And as I said that, before I said anything else, someone said, oh, you made a lot of money. And in all honesty, because of my orientation, I had never thought to equate money with success when it came to working with human beings. So what the reason I like to bring this up in this context is because sometimes we are assuming, because this is the Anti-Racism Task Force, there's an assumption of an orientation or a belief system or the way we believe things and the way we view the world. And what God offers us is a very different orientation to the world. So as I said, I had never equated money with success when it came to my patients. What I had equated with success is how God had worked in and through, used me, which was always shocking, but how God had also, the Holy Spirit had come in and touched people's hearts and minds in a way that brought about healing. So when we think about anti-racism, I think about it from an orientation of the Bible, biblical orientation, and basically an orientation, a God orientation. So for me, where we are and where we're going is always about this journey with God. It's always about following, and I like to use regular terminology, following God and following God's lead. As I told you before, in terms of how we got to the Anti-Racism Task Force on August 5th, this is when there's a call to prayer held, and the task force was formed. We are a group of American Baptist clergy and lay persons from across the whole nation, committed to live into our call to be the hands and feet of Christ in the world. Once again, if you hear a different orientation to the work. Anti-Racism Task Force, we were charged, as I said, with a goal to identify and surface anti-racism resources for the individual congregations and institutions, and also to work to include online meetings, symposiums, and larger small group meetings. And once again, this is, for us, this is sacred work. Anti-racism itself is the active dismantling of systems, the active dismantling of privileges, the active dismantling of everyday practices that reinforce and normalize the contemporary dimension of white dominance. Now, once again, let's go back to the notion of orientation. If my orientation is always with white dominance, then as the presenter was saying, that orientation may be very different what comes naturally for me, because my orientation is not about when. My orientation is not about the amount of money I can make to doing a particular work or service. So there's a different orientation. And to get to that, or to be free to even explore that, there has to be a dismantling of these systems. And this work is, this dismantling is actively identifies and opposes racial hatred, bias, systemic racism, white supremacy, and inequitable opportunity established on both an individual as well as a systemic level. And this is the work of the task force. This is the work of the denomination. And actually, this is the work of all of us. Once again, so here are other definitions of anti-racism. They all say pretty much the same thing in terms of the active process of identifying and eliminating racism. But it is this constant work that we're doing all the time. As an African-American woman, another example of that, when I grew up in Alabama, as I said, and I was born, my father was a school principal and my mother was a school teacher. And this was before integration, they were educators, but also after integration, they were educators. So in my little town, there were 3 schools. There was a high school, which was a what we call European American or white high school, and a white elementary school. And then there was the black school, the African American school, that was 1 through 12. That was pre-integration. After integration, there were still 3 schools, and what the Board of Education and the people got together and decided was that we keep the 3 schools, we go to the middle school concept, and they just dispersed teachers as well as students to those 3 schools based on their level, based on the teachers' training and their specializations. So when we look at the dismantling or an active process of identifying and eliminating racism, after integration, this happened. My father was a school principal. He was a school of the African-American school. And afterwards, he chose to become the principal of the middle school. And so there was this disbursement, but it was very intentional for the people in my little small town, that 1, they didn't want race wars like they had seen all over the country. And 2, they wanted to move forward in a more equitable, I would say, manner. And this was their way of doing it. They went a little further with that as well. And where there was a European American principal, there was always an African American assistant. With my father, who was an African American, he was the principal of the middle school, and so he had a European American assistant principal. They did the same thing with the secretary as well. There was a secretary. If the secretary was European American, there was an African American assistant. If the secretary was African American, there was a European American assistant. So once again, with my own story, you can see how people have tried for a very long time to identify and eliminate systems of oppression. And I like to tell that story because it also kind of pulls us backwards so that we can move forward. Sometimes when we talk about use the terminology of anti-racism, we think it's something new, but it's not. When we look at some of the struggles in the Bible, and I love to use the example of you remember the scripture that says when Jesus came, they said, well, can anything good come out of Nazareth? And that for me just tells it all. Much of his trouble, from a human perspective, because we all know this was a part of God's plan. But when we think about that, he was a Nazareth, and so he was down upon because it was supposedly a little country hick town, kind of like mine, Jackson, Alabama. But because he was coming from that space and place, once again, a type of orientation, the way they were looking at it, they treated him a certain way and felt privileged to treat him a certain way. He was not one of the Pharisees and Sadducees. He did not hang out with them. He did not become a part of their group. Jesus followed God's lead and God's journey, and he did what he was sent to do. So even in that way, you think about racism and anti-racism, how some of these same oppressive systems we find in our scriptures. I always like to bring this part up because so often when we talk to people, they talk about and they think about racism itself, because we're talking anti-racism, which is the opposite or of racism, or and sometimes I don't like to say it that way because it is within its own self and entity. It is an action that we're called to as human beings to love one another, as Christ has called us to love God with all our heart, our minds, our soul, and to love our neighbor as ourselves. But with racism itself, so often sometimes people get stuck in one of these areas and it becomes a single, definition. But prejudice is a part of the racist system or racialized society. Preconceived opinion that is not based on reason or actual experience is an effective feeling towards a person based on their perception or perceived group membership or that of someone else. Social power itself now is a form of power that is found in society and within politics. While physical power relies on strength, Social power is found within the rules of society and the laws of the land. And that's why you see when we do anti-racism work, it is not a single space and place, because racism is so entrenched in our society. We hear about microaggressions or something else, but they are aggressions. But you see it throughout society. You see it in different ways, and it manifests in so many different ways. So you have that social structure, the social power itself, which extends beyond, I think, an individual's way of thinking or seeing, or socially locating themselves as well. Then you have the legal authority, and that is any published source of law that presents the legal rules, the legal doctrines, or the legal reasoning that may be used in the basis of legal decisions. The authority also includes the weight or the charges or the degree of persuasiveness of the legal system. We've all heard about certain people, African Americans, or Black and brown people, getting larger sentences, things like that, or being treated more harshly. Or, I mean, just recently we see all of the shootings and the killings of George Floyd, and all of the names that Aubrey, that we can just list name after name after name. And I always caution, well, just remind us that it didn't start now. And so this is a system of oppression. And to remember, in the prejudice, the social power, and the legal authority, but in the prejudice, I always say, think and believe, it starts with the individual. And the individual or individuals come together as a society. Now, I want to show you this, and then I would like us to have a little bit of discussion. Jesus was lynched. Okay. When I show this film, sometimes I hesitate, but it's necessary. The cross and the lynching tree, in which Cone points out that no white theologians or preachers, and almost no Black ones, made a comparison between what happened to Jesus and what happened to at least 4,000 Black men and women and children. But when you juxtapose those two images in your mind, once you see the man hanging on the old rugged cross next to the man, or the man or woman hanging from a regular tree for everyone to gawk at, it's hard not to see lynchings as 19th and 20th century crucifixions. And I think this juxtaposition deepens our reflections on the cross itself and on our work as anti-racist, and honestly, our work as Christians and our work as God, as Christ followers. I'd like to stop here just for a moment. Part of what I'd like to ask if anyone could tell me, what do you see in this?
Smiling face. You see smiling faces and possibly Christians.
I also see, and thank you for reminding me of this. It's an excellent book. You see generations gathered, from children all the way, and like as Damon said, this is probably after Sunday service, right?
I see Ida B. Wells' story and how she got started in the anti-lynching campaign.
I'm glad you. Thanks for this reminder. I got to go back to my book now. Dr. Wimberly. I'm being mindful now that what I see is a re-crucifixion of Jesus every time a Black body, male, woman, or child was lynched. Because when you do it to the least of these, my brother and sister, you're doing it to me.
Thank you.
This
Say that.
violence over and over.
Say that.
Thank you.
But you see a system, you see a system that was never created for us.
Mm. Thank you.
White women teaching out there.
Exactly. And what do you think they teach us?
What they teach.
I heard
So
someone. Oh, go on.
I'm sorry. We was having a side conversation. And a side conversation that perpetuated such evil. And how we have perpetuated state conversation. And they in our schools teach predominantly white women's teachers in public schools.
Yes. And so it's interesting that you brought up the teaching. This was a classroom. These were reasons.
Wow.
Teaching.
Man.
And so the truth of the matter is, yes, they would stop church to go out and hang somebody and then go back in and sing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound.
So talk, Dr. Wimberly.
So you're saying this is the 50s? This is the 50s?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
Was this possibly the 50s then? This picture is the 50s?
For some reason I can't.
She's still.
I could hear that when you're whispering.
Was this, can we say this picture is in the 50s?
Yeah, this one, yes.
All right, so now you're looking at the kids in the 50s, you're looking at them being your teachers, your doctors, and your lawyers now.
Today. That's who teaches our kids who was at.
Exactly. And imagine, we'll use this whole notion of orientation again. Imagine how their worldview is being taught intentionally and developed. So these people, these human beings that were hanging from a tree were not to them human beings. And they passed that value forward. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree. Remember? Could anything good come out of Nazareth? Can anything good come out of Africa?
Right.
So we talk about this and we look at their faces, but then we have to remember the internalization that has happened with us as well. Can anything good kind of come out of Africa? The very first place I went out of this country was I went home because I needed a certain orientation of who I was, who I am, who God created me to be. I went to these castles where they enslaved people and stood at the door of no return. And there are people weeping all over because we've gone through those castles of those small rooms, remembering ancestors and coming finally to that door of no return, the infamous door of no return, standing and people are weeping and crying and something happened, like I'm hunched over now at the table, something happened and my back straightened up a little bit. And something happened inside of me that said, I have vindicated my ancestors because I came back of my own free will, not ashamed of who I am, not ashamed of where I had come from, and not one tear shed. There was a determination that happened. There was a remembering of who I am and who I will become as I'm becoming, because I'm not finished yet. So when we think about all of these things, our orientation into this world, we remember they put him to death on a tree. Why? Because we're made in God's own image. How often do we put those two together so that we can really embrace and be a part of this power that allows Christ to be victorious, even on a cross, even on a tree? And then when you think about it in terms of anti-racism, why wouldn't we stand up? Why wouldn't our backs straighten up? Why wouldn't our minds come back together? Why wouldn't we remember, bring back to who we are, made in the image of God? The orientation shifts and changes because God has called us his own. God has made us, created us in God's own image. Orientation changing, shifting. Not less than, not less than, more than conquerors. Not less than, again, more than conquerors. Making God's image. So as we do the anti-racism work, and what happens, you saw on this, that this is not easy work. It's just not. It's not easy work, and it's hard work, and it's work where you make a lot of enemies. I keep trying to bring this up. Where you make enemies, not intentionally, but you have to speak. That, you mentioned the prophetic activism. And I was just thinking about, during biblical times, the prophets were not really, how do we call it? They weren't really popular because they were truth tellers. True prophets were truth tellers. And so they were not the popular people. And often when God gives us something to say or to proclaim or to be in this world, it's not going to be popular. They put him to death by hanging him on a tree. That was only part of the story because they couldn't kill him. Death didn't hold him.
That's right.
So we just have to remember, made in his own image, being victorious, not less than, more than conqueror. And I'm looking at the clock a little bit here. Are there any thoughts or comments or discussion at this point?
Oh, so Dr. Wimberly, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah. Great. Okay. So you made the comment that they didn't see us as human. Elaborate on that, because I don't agree with that. I think they're very clear that they know that we are human and they just don't care.
Okay. I use that terminology in terms of dehumanization. So you're right. They did see us human, so they had to dehumanize us. You're exactly right in that way. So dehumanizing us, what they tried to do was to extract that imaging of God and the very humanness from us. Does that make
Why do you think that is?
Because they know it. Because we're made in God's own image. We're the original Hebrews. And there, if you really look at it,
They don't cancel you. You say that too loud.
pardon me?
I said, don't say that too loud. I get canceled.
Oh, I've been saying things a lot of years. I'll tell you experience I had in Newton, Massachusetts. I was walking on the street, and the man appeared to be, and I say appeared to be because a part of that whole system of why you ask is the imaging. It's changing and transforming truth, calling the falsehoods truth and truth falsehoods. And so the image of this older Jewish man, he was walking down the street going one way, I was coming the other way. And he stopped me. He said, "Excuse me, are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yes." He just kept going. Why? Why did they hang Jesus on the tree? He was a threat to their political, social, psychological, physical, what they perceived their well-being, their control. They had to get rid of him from that perspective. But that wasn't what God saw. That wasn't the reason God sent him. But God knew he could certainly use the human heart and mind to get the job done. Wasn't even that hard. If you think about how often Jesus healed people, healed the sick, even bringing somebody back from the dead, and that wasn't even enough. That wasn't even enough. They still put him to death by hanging him on a tree, which was the worst form of death. War for the worst criminal. I think often too that we can do a little more research ourselves to discover why. And I don't think it's hidden as deeply as we just haven't looked. The African Heritage Bible, when you start looking at that and reading that Bible as well, there's a lot of research that's available. You ask yourself why the Mormons have a whole lot of information on Black folks, or the Catholics have all this information about African Americans. Why? Good question. Why do they need to know so much about us? And they keep it separate, try to keep it separate from us, but honestly, everything's available. We just have to know that we need to go and look. We are made in God's own image.
Why did you hate everything that God said you've been made in it? If I see the God in you and you see the God in me, why would you hate me? So then, do you got God in you?
You know what I heard? Oh, I forget his name. Oh, critical race theory. Cornel West. I heard him say, he said, "Don't be surprised by evil." You see, I think this whole orientation thing, the way we think about it also is a part of the entrenchment of racism. And that is, like you say, if you see the God in me, if you see me as made in God's own image, how can you do harm to me if you're made in God's own image and I'm made in God's own image and we're reading the same Bible? And then that's another thing. Back in the day, they had a special Negro Bible where they took out everything except how you should obey your master. So you think about the level in which people, you know, went to or go to so that you don't know. That's real. You guys knew about the Negro Bible, right?
No.
Okay.
When they put the parts out, right, to give to the Negroes, he enslaved, I think. Is that the Bible you're referring to?
Pardon me?
Yeah.
I didn't hear you. What did you say? There's a Bible that they devised for the African American. And they took out most of the, well, a lot of the Old Testament and most of the New Testament, except the parts that said, obey your master. Those kind of things were left in. And that's what they gave to the Negro. So these are intentional things for years. And I think about it. Okay, talk about orientation again, how we think about things, our worldview. So what would be the first thing someone would say when you start talking like this? And you say, oh, don't say that out loud. Why? Because the first thing, they're already determined terms to shut me down anyway, to silence me, because all somebody would have to say, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist. Shut down. For most people, for many people. I won't say most, many. Even those things, those kind of terms maintain the system. You don't want to be a conspiracy theorist. Or you do. I don't mind if you want to call me that. But I name myself. So even orientation allows you to take back, or even to, I want to say take back power, but let's think about it. Let's orient ourselves in a different way. I don't need to take back something I didn't give up. I simply need to live into it. But God's not giving me a spirit of fear, but of power and a sound mind. So I just live into it. Orientation, one last thing. So we're oriented into a certain worldview that says in Job, I do use the lectionary for my preaching on Sundays, and I'm in the book of Job, and it was quite interesting. I'd never seen it before. Read the book of Job many times, and it talked about Job's integrity, going regardless of all the things he went through. Job's integrity, it said he kept his integrity. And it said it more than one time. His integrity, the word integrity. And I started thinking, one, why did I miss this word all these years? And two, what does that mean? In the midst of all of this, all of these things, we refer to Job when things are going bad or when things are hard. But I remember my father always saying to me, he would say, offenses must come. The scripture says offenses must come. And he'd say, they don't say they might come. They don't say they may come. He says offenses must come. And that was one way in which he prepared us for life. So when things started happening that I didn't like, when I had to watch my own mother take her last breath, when I was only 24 years old, that was in the back of my head that I remember what my father said. And also the faith in God. God's ways are not my ways. God's thoughts are not my thoughts. But can I trust God through it? Job says, Job did. What if I hang my life and my thoughts and my beliefs on Christ, on God, on my faith, on the reality of the scriptures? Because I don't see people skipping in roses throughout scriptures. I just don't. I see them living life and having struggles and going through, but I also see God being faithful in and through all of those things. Wherever they are, God is. Even when they think God isn't, God is right there. So if I can orient myself into this world in 2021, that God is with me no matter what is going on, maybe, just maybe, my orientation, my worldview can be a little different than what somebody is trying to tell me. Maybe I can hear God's truth Give me ears that hear and eyes that see, minds that a mind that understand, a heart filled with your wisdom, my spirit filled with your Holy Spirit to the fullest measure. All that came out of scripture. And they put him to death by hanging him on a tree. That was not the final answer.
Dr. Wimberly.
Stop right there. Okay, there we go.
Yeah, we are. Everything.
Okay. For some reason.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
I guess in front. Can you hear me now? I guess
Yeah.
I gotta get in front of this thing. Okay. We're very grateful for everything that you shared. We appreciate, you just stayed with us. I said a moment ago. Cohort. Can you hear me?
No. I can. It seems like it goes in and out for some reason.
How's that? Is that any better?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Anyway, we just thank you today for being a part of our this session, and we're just thankful for everything. So, yeah, it was very powerful. Thank you.
No, thank you very much for having me. And God bless you.
God bless you too.
Certainly.
You have a wonderful day.
All right, you also.
All righty. Bye-bye.
Shalom.
Shalom.
In the head to see must have human survive this trauma. She even talked about how even with 9/11, you can't even have a 9/11 trauma. Can't even see a dog killed without some type of trauma. We went through hundreds of years and not any type of healing. You're free. And then that picture clearly showed you that in the 50s, we're dealing with them that is going wrong. Right. Those are the descendants.
I just got to figure out this technology. I'm sorry. Let's go do lunch.